Day 29.
Well, I have finally made either the greatest decision of my entire career, or the greatest blunder that will be known in all of recorded history. I have given Omega permission to use Polyphylos as his target. I'm not sure I can follow all of his calculations, but if he is correct, then we shall have even greater power than even I had ever dreamed of. Gallifrey will be secure for all time. He came rushing in here this morning, a pile of calculations a foot thick in his hand, and so excited he could not speak. Finally, he calmed down enough to explain his crazy theory.
"It's the Q-star that makes it possible," he explained. "Tremendous potential energy, locked into a tight field because of the axial spin of the star. If we detonate Polyphylos, then we can actually channel that power."
He showed me his calculations. Some I shall have to take his word on, but others made more than perfect sense to me. What his new idea boils down to basically is this. If we use the hand of Omega to detonate the Q-star, the resulting explosion of energy can be captured and utilized. It will produce a sort of one-directional explosion, which Omega proposes to aim at Gallifrey. The force of detonation will turn the star into a source of chronons. Chronons are the basic particles of time. Using these, we can then contain the explosion, stretching it out quite literally forever, and produce a continuous flow of energy directed towards Gallifrey, a flow consisting of high-energy chronons. I have to confess that I didn't see the point in all of this initially, but Omega has it all worked out. Given the proper force fields to shield us from the power, and a collection device here on Gallifrey itself, the chronon particles will allow us to penetrate through time itself. The time scoop used to collect the players in the game does this, of course, but in a very crude manner. It uses terranium for the process, and we are fortunate in having a large supply of the rare metal in our closest moon. But it's a very rough process, and works only over a small area. Using the harness force of the Q-star, however, we will be able to be much more selective. Omega hypothesizes that we should be able not merely to pull objects and people out of time, but also be able to push them through from here to any time or place in the universe in a single instant. We would be able to manipulate time, instead of being a prey to its implacable forces. The thought appeals to me greatly, and I have given Omega the permissions and funds he needs to complete the process. I shall have to design the force field generators and equipment myself for the containment fields here, and for our use when we detonate Polyphylos. After all, if we were caught in the explosion, who knows what might happen to us? Perhaps we should simply be eradicated in a microsecond. But, given the strange forces at work in the heart of a Q-star, perhaps something even worse might occur. And of course, should the collectors for the beam power not be perfectly aligned on Gallifrey, then the flood of chronons that hits the planet will literally explode it and send its scattered fragments throughout all of eternity. We shall have either the staggering power to manipulate time and space on a scale undreamed of, or else the biggest explosion in history since the creation of the universe itself. What scientist could resist a challenge like that?
Day 34.
Putting a stop to the games is probably the most unpleasant task I've ever had to face in my short time in power. Oh, the populace of Gallifrey grumbled about the higher taxes I imposed, and they complained when I insisted on funding pure research. But nothing like this protest. When I imposed the strict segregation in schooling, there were protests for days. The parents complained that I was unfairly rewarding brighter children, and that intelligence couldn't be measured in academic marks and all the usual liberal claptrap. You cannot argue with people like that, and I didn't bother. I don't care if they think I'm sending a message to the lower classes that they are not worth as much as the brighter children. The future will lie in the hands of those with ability and talents, not in the hands of the masses. Even General Gimel thinks my decision to ban the games, however, is a bad move. I do not question his loyalty, of course, but sometimes his blunt soldier's opinions are a bit too much for me to stomach.
"You can institute all the reforms you like," he told me in private. "It doesn't matter how unpopular they are. If they produce results, the complaints will stop. Your education policies might be controversial, But if they lead to an increase in output and revenues generally, then protests will die down. But stopping the games is madness. They are the outlet for the masses. They funnel their emotions and anger and fury into watching the combatants. It's therapeutic for them.
I don't care what it is for them, I replied. If the time scoop is still operating when we explode Polyphylos, the time distortion that it produces could wreck the careful system of forces that I am setting up.
Well, if you must shut it down, do so only when you really have to.
Gimel, I answered, wishing he had the brain to understand me. Time distortions aren't something that die down in an hour or two. The ripples from the scoop could last for years for all we know. I have to have it turned off now so that I can definitely know what effects it has had on the Time War about Gallifrey. Don't you understand that if my calculations are wrong, then this entire planet will be less than dust floating in the vacuum of space?
If it's that dangerous, he growled, then maybe you shouldn't even attempt it.
Gimel, don't be short-sighted. Exploding a Q-star is a theoretical possibility that might occur to any civilization that has broken through time in any manner whatsoever. Right now, we are the only civilization that we know has done this. Sooner or later, there will be others. If one of them should harness a Q-star, then they will be able to control all of time and space and the destinies of a myriad worlds, including ours. Do you not see that if we fail to conquer time, then whichever race does so will also conquer us? Now that we know it can be done, it must be done, for the security of Gallifrey. That he could finally understand. He was good at any kind of logic that involved war.
But the banning of the games will be a hard blow.
We all must make sacrifices, Gimel, I told him. The populace will have to find another way to sate their bloodlust and boredom.
And if it is on each other?
He asked.
There are groups who claim that without the sublimated violence of the games, we shall have an increase in crime, particularly violent crime.
Then let them take it out on one another, I told him. Violence is the first home of the foolish man, and his last. I smiled. We should organize special patrols, then, and arm them. Give those who want to the chance physically to fight back if there's an increase in crime. That should make them happy. They can kill one another off.
And a lot of innocent people,
Gimel objected. He was getting tiresome. Innocence is a word that means whatever its user wants. Being born means you're involved in life. There are no innocents, merely the uncommitted. We are going to ban the games, and if the people object, let them. They will sooner or later find some other stupid diversion to take their minds off that one. If it does become a problem, then we shall act. Otherwise, let them complain.
Day 38.
Well, Gimel was certainly right about the complaints. Morning, noon, and night. Days without let-up. I finally agreed to see a group representing the most vocal complaints. Their leader got right to the point, demanding that the games be restarted, or else.
Or else what? I asked, curiously. We are ready to organize planet-wide strikes, he answered, with stupid pride. Bring everything to a halt until you give in.
And what makes you think I would ever give in? I wanted to know.
You would have to, he told me. Civilization would begin to crumble.
Your civilization, not mine, I told him. The only people you would affect by this strike of yours would be yourselves and your families. I couldn't care less what you do amongst yourselves, to be honest. I'm tempted to allow you to go ahead. However, I have had a better idea.
What's that?
He asked suspiciously. I'll revive a form of the games, I told him. Only, instead of it being played using alien warriors, it would be played using whiners, complainers, malcontents, and the like. You, for example. You want the games so badly, then you play in them. You fight, and bleed, and die for the entertainment of your fellow sociopaths. Don't you find it morally repugnant to kidnap intelligent beings from other worlds and force them to fight one another to the death just to give you something to watch with your supper?
Or are words like morality and decency too complicated for you to understand? If so, I will make it plain. Tell your members that the games will recommence next week. The first matches will be played out using the 10 people whose names I first hear of complaining about the loss of the games.
You can't do that!
He screamed furiously.
You cannot use a citizen of Gallifrey as pawns in the games!
You idiot! I snapped back at him. I can do whatever I chose to do. And I swear to you that I shall do exactly what I told you. Starting now, anyone who protests the loss of the games goes into the Forbidden Zone to play in the next round. Do any of you have anything to say to that? Gimel and his guards moved significantly closer. The delegation paled to a man, and no one spoke. Good. I see that we understand one another perfectly. Now, go home, and make certain that everyone understands what I have just told you. In 2 days' time, I shall have written into law that anyone who publicly calls for the return of the games will be fighting in them the next day. I suspect that the fuss of the cancellation will die down very quickly now.
Day 43.
It is really quite astonishing how much progress has been made in so short a time. The public outcry over the cancellation of the games has died down once everyone realized that my threat was quite serious. It took only one roundup of the dissident factions to convince people that they didn't really want the games back after all. I was tempted to dismantle the entire apparatus for the time scoop and to obliterate the playing arena, but realized in time that this would have simply been operating out of spite. Instead, I simply set up a new force field generator within the Great Tower, of which only I know the frequency, and have sealed off the entire Forbidden Zone. The apparatus for the time scoop I had moved, and it is now well hidden within the walls of the redesigned Panopticon section of the Citadel. Finally, I am getting the chance to indulge in my architectural leanings. I have been rebuilding the Citadel. I am, perhaps, an idealist, but I am no fool. Though I know all of my legislation is necessary to make Gallifrey strong, I do not for one moment imagine that I am popular because of it. I very much doubt whether it would be safe for me to leave the Citadel for a few years yet, and am thus making a virtue out of necessity. With the Citadel building as my basis, I am redesigning the entire complex. Once it is finished, all the power, both intellectual as well as physical, on the planet will be concentrated here. I plan an academy area, the Panopticon itself, which will house all the representatives of the various chapters, as soon as I am certain that I can trust them, of course. The security offices, to replace the rather cramped quarters that Gimel and the guards now occupy, and the various laboratories and public offices that are needed. I am also adding a presidential suite or two. Though it is too soon yet, I shall eventually have to accept the office of president, though not until I am certain that I can trust enough people to form the remainder of the High Council. Until then, I will stand alone.
Day 50.
Some obscure biologist by the name of Thremix, poor fellow, being saddled with a name like that, came to see me today with what must be one of the most extraordinary ideas for a project that I have ever approved. Since the proclamation about the new funding for pure science, I have sat through quite a number of odd sessions, either to approve or deny funding, but Thremix was certainly one of the most strangest petitioners I have met yet. He proposes to develop a disease called immortality.
Not a disease, exactly.
He corrected me in his nervous way when I laughed.
A virus. It will live within the body and breed. It will be specifically tied into the genes of the person it inhabits, and will constantly monitor that person's body, eliminating and repairing anything that goes wrong. For example, if you were to break a leg, it would enable the break to heal in about a quarter of the time that it would naturally. Burns, diseases, and other problems could be healed in a day.
And death? I asked, half believing him. He was so intense and serious.
Well, that, actually, it couldn't do much about. Not real death, that is.
Are there any other kinds? Gimel asked in his brusque way.
Oh, yes. Suppose for a moment that you had a heart attack and collapsed. Would you die?
Not if there were a physician around who could restart my heart, Gimel answered. If I was alone, yes, I'd probably die.
Well, my virus would be like a surgeon, only an internal one. It would restart your heart for you, because it would know how your body should be functioning, and work to keep it like that. Of course, if you had a complete breakdown of your body system, then it couldn't work. For instance, if someone shot you with a staser.
Well, that's a relief, Gimel said with his grim humor. I like to see a man I shoot stay dead. I have to confess I was intrigued by Three-Mix's suggestions. Mad as they might seem, he did sound serious, and he wanted a pitifully small amount of money. He almost slobbered over me in gratitude when I agreed to fund him, but I finally got rid of him. I could see that Gimel didn't approve, so I invited his comments. I had the man checked out, he told me. He's considered completely unreliable by the scientific community, a charlatan. Good, I replied. So was I at one time. And think, Gimel, if he is right in even one half of what he claims, then we shall have solved a problem I had thought insurmountable. I'm sure you have the same trouble I have. Have you ever given serious thought to who will succeed you when you either retire or die? I've 6 or 7 men I've had my eye on, Lord Rassilon, he said. But frankly, well, none of them is exactly what I had hoped for. Well, you can imagine my problem. Gallifrey is running smoothly with my hand at its political helm, but if I were to die, it would undoubtedly founder back to its stupid old ways. But one day I must die, and pass on the reins of power. I am constantly tormented by the nightmare that I might choose the wrong man, someone who will dilute my dream, or prove to be weak or corrupt. Now, if Three-Mix should be correct, we can take a lot longer to make our decisions. Perhaps they might be indefinitely postponed. If he is wrong, what have we lost? A little money. I think the chance is worth taking. Gimel was not convinced, I could see, but he wisely held his counsel.
Day 73.
Three-Mix finally resurfaced today with news that is both good and bad. Despite Gimel's misgivings, the biosynthesis had produced some results. He managed to create his strain of virus, and he is fairly certain that it will do what he wants. There are, however, a few drawbacks to his wonderful invention.
I can't guarantee that it will work on everyone,
he explained.
Theoretically, there are some problems. There are 3 possibilities that I can see. First, it will work perfectly, and the recipient will become endowed with extra virtues and a terrific resistance to sickness, aging, and even death itself. That's the best case scenario. Second, the recipient's own bodily defenses will think it's an infection and try to combat it. In this case, the virus might simply be overwhelmed, and the recipient will be left as he was before the infection. Alternatively, the virus might win and take effect. It's impossible to be certain what would happen there. Third, what I am really worried about. My virus takes its template for rebuilding the body and keeping it healthy when we inject it into the body. But what if the first cell it chances to scan is actually a disease cell, or a parasite, or some other defective cell? It will assume that this is the normal cell, and wreck the rest of the body to try to match it. It would become a killer instead of a healer.
Interesting, I agreed. Is there any way for you to predict which will happen with any given person?
Oh yes,
He told me.
That's simply a matter of taking a small tissue sample and injecting it with the virus. If the sample dies, then so would the recipient.
Then why not simply inject only those who could stand the treatment?
You don't seem to grasp the problem fully,
Three-Mix said in some anguish.
My process is a virus. I can't simply inject one person or another with it and leave it at that. It will breed like any normal virus and spread from person to person as contact is made. If even one person contracts the virus, within a month the entire planet would become infected.
I began to see his problem. Well, I think you better try refining it a bit. He shrugged.
I really can't see how much else I could do with it,
he admitted.
There are limits to what you can do with a simple virus.
A dreadful thought came to me. Just a moment. This business of infection. Let's say for the sake of argument that you injected yourself with the virus. I take it that you haven't.
Of course not,
he said in horror.
I've used only experimental animals in strict quarantine.
Good. Well, if you were to pass on the virus to, say, Gimel here, wouldn't it simply kill him? After all, his genetic code is entirely different to yours, and the virus would assume it was all faulty. I could see that the idea didn't appeal much to Gimel.
No, I compensated for that.
Three-Mix explained.
The virus works only if the genetic variations are of a small order, say up to 20%. If there's more than that, then it takes a fresh sample and starts again. So if the other person were infected with the virus, the little devil would simply recalibrate, so to speak, and start to work.
Another problem occurs to me, Gimel put in, showing more sense than I expected of him. How would it affect a pregnant woman? Would it assume that the baby's genetic coding is wrong, and alter it to an exact duplicate of the mother's?
That had occurred to me,
Three-Mix admitted.
I too had the same vision, a future populated purely by women, each one identical in all aspects to their mother. Until of course all the men capable of breeding with them died out, dooming the race to eventual extinction. Not a pretty thought, is it? Unfortunately, the virus is sophisticated enough to allow for that. I can assure that a baby, with 50% of the mother's genetic material, would be considered as a secondary unit. You see, it's simply a variation on the injection problem.
So basically, you're telling me that we have only one choice to make, I asked him. Either to infect the whole planet with the longevity virus, or to withhold it from all.
Exactly,
he agreed.
We must do one or the other. It's not a decision I'd relish making.
It's not a decision that you have to make, I told him coldly. I shall have to decide. It might be wise in either case, Gimel suggested, to have Three-Mix here test out the virus on samples from the top level of command. It would be unfortunate if any of us proved to have an adverse reaction. I could see his point there. Naturally, I have ordered a series of tests to be conducted among the people I can trust, especially, of course, on myself. If the virus will kill me, then it will stay hidden away until I am dead. If it will not work, the same is to hold true. If, on the other hand, it will work on me, then I really have no option but to authorize its release.
Day 80.
Three-Mix has returned with some good news and some excellent news. It turns out that in his usual silly way, it had never occurred to him to perform tests on a humanoid subject. He confined his work to lower animal life. What he has found is truly remarkable, though perhaps somewhat accidental. The virus not merely heals, but regenerates tissue. Portions of diseased or dismembered tissues, even ones that were decades old, actually grew back into place. He's off again now, working on some new thoughts that this has given to him, and with my blessing, perhaps his virus will prove to be even better than I dared to have ever hoped. And the excellent news is that the virus will work perfectly on both myself and Gimel.
Day 84.
I am beginning to suspect that a little of Omega's eccentricity is rubbing off onto me. My personal force shields are finished, and work, as I expected, perfectly. They are worn across the shoulders, and because of their appearance, I have named them the sashes of Rassilon. Omega smiled when I handed his over to him. Well, if he can name his invention after his hand, he needn't be so amused with my names. Still, both sashes work perfectly, allowing us to approach within the critical distance that we shall need to penetrate when we detonate Polyphylos. Omega has worked brilliantly on his engineering, and only 2 ships are required to do the work. He will man the main ship, which will dive into the corona of the star and deliver the hand of Omega with precisely the right trajectory it will need. I had wondered about this, since the hand is capable of remote programming, but Omega had his reasons.
If we just wanted to detonate the star, then I could fire off the hand from here,
he agreed.
But we need to detonate it at a specific instant in its rotation, so as to funnel the chronons on an exact path. That requires us to approach within 2 solar radii of the star. Your ship will maintain the force fields in place, and mine will dive in to deliver the hand precisely on target. These sashes will protect us from the forces, and then we can return to the main fleet, which will be holding an orbital pattern much farther out.
There is no doubt at all in my mind that the man is a genius, which makes him doubly dangerous, of course. because he has never hidden from me the fact that he thinks I should share the reins of power with elected officials. I shall have to ensure that he is watched.
Day 85.
Once again, Gimel has proven his resourcefulness. I had mentioned the thought about watching Omega, and Gimel informed me that he's had an agent close to Omega for many weeks now. Gimel, careful as ever, has never fully trusted Omega. He has also taken it upon himself to have other individuals monitored, including 3Mix, it seems. That strikes me as going too far. 3Mix hasn't got a single political thought in his head. I seriously doubt if he even dreams of anything that doesn't have viruses in it. Still, it makes me think. With all of this surveillance, none of which I knew about before, how much can Gimel himself be trusted?